Welcome back to A Numbers Game with Ryan Grodusky. Thank you guys for being here. I want to address the tragic shooting that happened in Minneapolis between an ICE agent and a protester that unfortunately led to her death. But there's some economic news I'd like to get to before that. That's going to be the bulk of the show, is the Minneapolis shooting. But there's some really important economic data that I think that my audience really needs to know. First, our trade deficit has collapsed. October 2025, the new data that came out shows it's the lowest trade deficit since 2009, just a $29.4 billion trade deficit, about a 50% drop from the month prior. According to the New York Times, imports in October fell 3.2% to $331.4 billion from the previous month, while exports rose 2.6% to $302 billion. Because exports grew more than imports, the U.S. trade deficit shrank in line with President Trump's goal. This was a big promise from President Trump, and a lot of detractors said it's impossible to get the trade deficit down. In fact, it's a good thing we have a trade deficit, and it's not there yet. We're not balanced yet, but man, it's closer than it's been in a long, long time. 2009. That was a long time ago. I was still in college, or was just coming out. I was still in college at the time before I dropped out. It was a long time ago. This is a big, big progress from President Trump. Productivity rose by 4.9%, which is very good. And I want to note that the U.S. jobs open did drop, though, by 303,000 to 7.146 million, the second lowest number since December 2020. Okay, among all this good news, there is some rough economic data coming from Trump's base. There was a Substack that I read by a guy named Joseph Polatino. Guys, my pronunciations are not always the best with names. Joseph Polentino, about America losing blue-collar jobs over the last year. He writes, quote, "The country is down 65,000 industrial jobs in the last year, a dramatic reversal from 2024 when it added 250,000 jobs. The vast majority of these job losses come from two industries, manufacturing and transportation. Transportation, remember, is the biggest job creator for people without a high school diploma. Total employment across trades is down 123,000 from their all-time peak in early 2025. And so it doesn't all have to do with Trump, though. Manufacturing jobs have been on a steady decline for 2 straight years, and the sector has hit a record low. Just 8% of all jobs in the workforce are manufacturing. All major industries except metals and non-metallic minerals have lost a total of 200,000 manufacturing jobs since early 2023. Three biggest types of manufacturing jobs seeing declines are car makers, semiconductor fabricators, and product manufacturing. When it comes to car makers, the jobs dealing with steering and suspension have made up half of those losses. I guess those are two particular trades in manufacturing. They make up the bulk. States with the biggest decline in manufacturing, a lot of them are out west: Montana, Oregon, California, Washington, but there's also Iowa, Virginia, West Virginia, Missouri, and Nebraska. Of the three big blue wall states that Trump needed to win for the presidency, only Pennsylvania has seen manufacturing grow from September 2024 to September 2025. Ohio, Minnesota also saw some job growth in manufacturing, but Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, all of them are down. Other key swing states like North Carolina and Arizona have also lost manufacturing jobs. The big shift from construction jobs, though, it's only added 52,000 over the last 12 months compared to 191,000 in the year prior. Residential contractors, including plumbers, electricians, roofers, and other specialty work like that, they've lost 55,000 jobs in the last year. Palantino, the Substack writer, said the decline comes from structural decline in manufacturing. The demand for durable goods and consumer electronics is in decline, and early COVID home building, that boom has ended. Transportation jobs are slowing as the trucking sector struggles. And semiconductors, which, remember, President Biden, he's passed the CHIPS Act, and it was going to be amazing. It was going to be our new industry with semiconductors. He says, well, semiconductor manufacturing is already below the 2021 levels, as most data center chips are imported from Taiwan and Mexico. When it comes to construction, America gained 76,000 non-residential construction jobs and 25,000 civil and heavy engineering jobs, but lost 50,000 residential construction jobs. Residential construction is in massive in decline. Real estate investment in single homes is down 21%, while investment in multifamily homes is down 24% since 2021. The only area that's seeing a bit of a boom is home renovations. People are like getting, I guess, inspired by HGTV and they're remodeling old homes. States like New Jersey, New York, California, Nevada, Washington, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, and Arkansas have lost massive levels of construction jobs. One bright spot is the Great Lakes states, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and places like Kentucky, Virginia, Alabama, and the Carolinas are seeing construction jobs go up. But it's been very uneasy. America has lost roughly 13,000 jobs in resource extraction, he also writes, over the last year, primarily due to extended losses in the fracking industry. America lost 13% of all its oil and gas extracting jobs since mid 2023. This is how Joseph Palatino summarizes it in the state of blue collar jobs in America. After all, it's easier to invent more productive, less labor intense ways to assemble televisions than cutting hair, engineering chemicals, or teaching children. The key phrase that there is more productivity in this world, manufacturing employment would be declining while manufacturing output rises. America will be building not only new homes and infrastructure to meet its current shortage, but also adding more than enough to prepare for future generations. Instead, they are struggling to meet rising electricity demands. The country will be rapidly building out new power sources. Highly automated factories will be chugging away. None of this is happening right now. Productivity is weak in both manufacturing and construction industries. Home building activity is slower than it was in 2005. The country is making fewer cars than it did in the late 70s. It's losing jobs in its high-tech electronic manufacturing industries. Perhaps the only major blue-collar sector that fits the ideal archetype is oil, where America has become the world's largest producer, even as the industry employs 40% fewer people from peak 2014. Yet, despite America's rapid oil growth, it remains but a tiny exception to the scale of the overall economy. Short-term factors are driving the loss of blue-collar jobs are bad enough, but they are made even worse by the fact that America would need more blue-collar workers and increase in their efficiency to make up for decades of persistent underperformance. Instead, it is more likely that the U.S. will continue losing blue-collar jobs even as structural problems and shortages of necessary sorry guys, necessary infrastructure gets even more acute. This is so profound to me, this article, and the data behind it was so rich. Listen, working class people, blue collar people are the base of the Republican Party. Whites without a college degree. No Republican, or essentially no Republican, maybe there are a handful in South Texas or South Florida, but essentially no Republican in this country can win without the backs of blue collar, non college educated white Americans. They are what put Donald Trump in the White House more than anybody. They kept Florida red. They keep Texas red. They made the blue wall states turn red. These are the people that are the absolute base of the Republican Party. If the Republican Party were a cake, they would be the batter. There is no exception to this rule. And they're unlikely to become Democrats because the Democrats support policies that are just too unaligned with what they believe in. But if you want to be competitive in any election, they need to show up. And their pocketbook issues aren't just a matter of bringing prices down or more available housing. They have to have jobs. I mean, this is just the truth. And this should be more important to a Republican administration than the Venezuelans living in South Florida or the tech bros in Silicon Valley or the people who work on Wall Street. None of them got Donald Trump elected. Working class white people got Donald Trump elected, both in 2016 and in 2024. Anyone telling you any different is talking about the margins. They're not talking about the base of the Republican Party. Working class people who voted for Obama twice, whose parents probably voted for Clinton, if not, they also probably voted for Clinton if they're of a certain age. These are the people who make up the modern day Republican Party. And if the economy is failing them, it is failing the very, very base that they need to win in the future. It's just that simple. And it should be all hands on deck to sit there and figure out how do we get manufacturing and construction and blue collar jobs, not only increasing in hiring, but protected into the future. These people should not be replaced by robots or machines or immigrants or anybody. They are your voters. You should protect them. That's how I personally feel. Next up, I have a special guest to discuss the Minneapolis shooting. It's a fascinating conversation by a brilliant lawyer. That's coming up next. Stay tuned. My guest for today's episode is my buddy Marina Medvin. She is a very talented senior trial attorney to go over the incident in Minneapolis, the shooting. Marina, now you're a lawyer, so I want to just establish certain facts before we go into it. So ICE was doing a law enforcement measure, an exercise. Um, I wasn't sure whether it's a raid or what it was, but it was an exercise though. And the 37-year-old mother, Renee Good, and her wife, allegedly, she claimed to be her wife, was there, and her car was blocking the road where ICE agents were trying to move. She let one go, but her car was perpendicular to traffic, which you would only do if you were backing up into like a parking spot or if you were making a K turn, which was a one-way street, which you wouldn't do. And CNN witnesses said that her car was there to be perpendicular for the purpose of stopping ICE agents from conducting their movement. Is it legal to block traffic for federal law enforcement trying to do an exercise?
So in response to this exact question, no, it's not legal to block law enforcement officers. There's a federal code section against this. It's 18 U.S.C. 111. You're not allowed to impede or interfere with federal law enforcement agents while they are on duty or carrying out actions pursuant to their duties. In this case, in fact, they were on duty. They were doing something with a vehicle that appeared to have been stuck on ice or snow. And so her actions, based on what the witnesses are saying, we don't have exact video evidence of what she was doing, but it sounds like she was impeding or interfering with their performance in at least through the particular positioning of her vehicle. There may have been other things going on. What's interesting, if we watch the same video, there's actually a much longer video from the one that everyone's been seeing. And if we watch the video, we're able to kind of piece it together a little bit better. And actually, you'll see that in the beginning of the video, I took a screenshot here, the officer who later uses force is actually seen with her wife right there.
Wow, I did not see this video. Okay, so explain what was going on. So the officer comes to the car. Her wife is behind the vehicle. For those who go
Yeah.
on YouTube, if you're watching this on camera, so if you go on YouTube, you'll see this. If not, if you're listening, her
I'm
wife
gonna
is
post
sitting
it.
behind the yes.
I'll post it on my X account so everyone can see. But this is the same video that we were seeing, that everyone's watching, that angle that we keep seeing replaying over and over. I simply did a little bit of digging and found the longest version of this video, and this was simply in the beginning. So the officer is out there, and he has his cell phone in front of him. He appears to be recording. And this woman is her wife. And how do we know? Because it matches the outfit, and CNN and other news sources later identified her as the wife. And in the video where she's identified as the wife, you actually hear the witness who's shooting the video state that she was previously inside of that maroon SUV with the woman who's now deceased. So the two of them were in the vehicle. At some point, the wife gets out. She also has her cell phone out. And she's following the officer who has his cell phone out. And the two of them appear to be at this moment recording each other, but the officer is recording. And in the beginning of the video, you see the officer actually start moving towards the passenger side of that SUV, and the wife is following him. Eventually, they come out of view, so we can't see what happens after. Now, I started trying to figure out, I'm going back and forth on this video, pulling it, forward, back in time, trying to figure out where he's standing at this point, because the wife actually ends up being somewhere farther back.
She's on the sidewalk, it appears, at one point.
He's no longer once she follows him through and he goes to the side of the vehicle, she's no longer anywhere near there. She goes back somewhere. So she's no longer relevant to this particular story, but he is. So where is his location? Well, I started circling in orange here, if you could see, where his feet would be. And he's not visible anywhere. Only position where he can be standing is near the passenger side area. So if we're looking through the front of the windows, we can't see him around. We're looking for his feet, his shadow, nothing. Nothing is visible. The only area that's not visible is this passenger side window or the corner, maybe the front area. That's not visible. So he's somewhere there near the passenger side. Eventually, and this is now the video or at least a portion of the video that everyone's now seeing, we see the car start moving because another officer. He actually curses, says, "Get the F out of the vehicle." He tells him,
Mhm.
"Get out of the vehicle." I think he says that twice and then says, "Get the F out of the vehicle." Then with his right hand, he grabs the doorknob or the
Mhm.
handle.
Mhm.
Left hand, he grabs the window area that's actually open. So his fingers are inside of the vehicle at this point. So his left hand is inside of that window. His right hand is on the vehicle door. And the vehicle starts moving with him attached to it. And as the vehicle moves, all of a sudden, see the other officer in view and look at his hand. And I'll talk to you about the movement in a second, but look at what's in his hand. It's his cell phone. He's still.
Mhm.
But how do we get to this frame even before that? And no one seemed to have pointed out that he was actually just standing there recording. How did we get to that point? Well, he was not visible previously, right? Then he becomes visible. Now, how does that happen? She moves her car back and straight. And by doing that, she reveals the area that was previously that driver's side door or the
Passenger side door. Yeah.
passenger corner. So all of a sudden, we see that he was, in fact, that area that we couldn't figure out where he was standing up in that passenger area. It's revealed that he's standing still. He wasn't moving or walking in that area. He's standing still in that passenger area. So he didn't stand in front of her car. He didn't get in front of her vehicle. He didn't
That
position himself there. She positioned him there. When
That's fascinating because the reporting is saying ICE officers usually don't approach from the front of the car, and this is therefore bad behavior by him. But what you're saying is that the car moved to make it the front of the car. That's fascinating.
Correct.
Okay.
And in fact, he was walking around the car. Again, when we see that full video, he's actually walking from behind to that side area and then eventually becomes in the front when her vehicle moves and reveals he's standing there. She positions him to a point where he's standing in front. He didn't make that his strategic position. And again, he's there filming. His cell phone is in his hand. In his hand is his cell phone right there. That's not a firearm, that's a cell phone that's pointed in that direction. Now, only after she switches gears, she's no longer going in reverse. She is now moving.
And wait, can we wait 1 second? So when she goes into reverse, she's clearly moving, I guess, to her right. Her car is angling to her right and then gearing out to the left because the wheels, I think, move towards the right. Okay.
The wheels at this point aren't even moving yet. So initially, she puts the car in reverse. After she puts the car in reverse and she drives it in reverse, she then changes gears and she then shifts her tires and then now pointed forwards
Mhm.
towards the officer. The wheels of the car have three directions in that video. Initially, it's pointed towards the left of the frame of the video. Then they're pointed towards the officer and forward, and eventually they point to the right of the frame of the video. And so there are three separate directions. When those tires are pointed towards the officer, and when the car is in drive, and when it is approaching him, and in fact, it's accelerating towards him, as you could hear, he draws that firearm. This is the moment that he's drawing that firearm. Look at the tires at that moment. He's
Mhm.
drawing right there, we see, and look at her tires
Yeah.
pointed straight towards him. They are not pointed towards the right of the frame just yet. The moment that he fires, this is the moment that he fires. You can't see anything specific, but this is the moment where you hear on audio his firearm coming up.
Mhm.
The tires are pointed straight. They
Straight
are
at him.
forward towards him. It's
Mhm.
not until after that first bullet leaves his gun that the tires then shift to what we see as the right of the frame. And then she kind of wanders off. At this point, I don't know how much control she has because we
Right.
a bullet somewhere.
In her face. Okay, so wait, before I want to go into there, I have a few other questions that were asked from people that people were saying online that I wanted a lawyer to clear up. So now it looks like she did wave at least one car to go before she stopped other cars, maybe trying to slow just ICE agents down. It wasn't exactly sure. People saying online that ICE agents have no legal right to interrogate or arrest American citizens. Is that true?
Was that the position that people held on January 6th when a lot of liberals advocated for American citizens to be investigated for federal offenses? No, that's obviously not the case. Federal law
Okay.
can enforce federal laws And depending on the situation, there are different laws that are applicable. Here, like I said, 18 USC 111, that's the obstruction of federal law enforcement and the performance of their duties. It's that code section that appears to have been the reason why they stopped her vehicle, because
Hmm.
it was obstructing them as they were attempting to perform their job. She was impeding them. So they, at that point, were investigating her for a violation of that code section. You need
Right.
reasonable suspicion to stop a vehicle. They had that reasonable suspicion at that time. Did they have probable cause to arrest her for that? I don't know. Maybe they had, maybe they did
But
not.
they
Don't,
did ask her to get out of the car,
yes.
and
And
they
they had,
attempted to remove her from the car.
they
That's a
would have
thing.
had.
That is a clear thing that they didn't just go to shoot. They asked to get her out of the car. Now, I want my listeners to hear this. Using cars to stop ICE agents from performing their practices is becoming very normal by anti-ICE protesters. In Minneapolis, just 6 months ago, this ICE agent who did the shooting received 33 stitches after he was dragged for 300 feet by a protester's car. There was another attack last month in Minneapolis where someone rammed their car into agents that were trying to arrest an illegal alien. There have been 28 known ramming incidences in the last several months against ICE agents, a 1,300% increase in the year prior. Now, let's go back to the case. Agents approach the car. They try to open the door. That's when Renee backs up and they start yelling at her, stop. And then she goes. Is there a real case of self-defense for the ICE agent? You mentioned the tires. Is the fact that he shot multiple times a case against him? Like that was excessive force?
That's a good question, because there's been, this is not obviously the first officer who's ever used force. There's been
Mhm.
quite a few expert witnesses who have testified in a variety of these law enforcement use of force cases that have all said that once an officer is committed to firing that first shot, can't control how many come out. So the reality is that an officer can fire 1, 2, 3 bullets. And all of that is part of that initial mindset where I'm going to use force right now to deter the danger. And the idea that, well, after he fires that first bullet, the wheels then shift away from him and the car starts veering off, that he at that point should have stopped firing. That's not how human brains work. Once they perceive that threat, they commit to deterring the threat. And that's exactly what he did here. If he would have fired one shot, I would have been surprised, to be perfectly honest, because when that adrenaline is pumping through a man's body, he doesn't have that type of control where he's going to necessarily fire just 1 or 2. I think 3 tends to be average in terms of how many shots are fired when the individual who's holding a firearm commits to using force as self-defense or lethal force.
And a federal agent has, or any law enforcement has, there's this claim, and I think that it's a joke, but I mean, I have to address it because so many people have said it, that police officers and law enforcement have to retreat before shooting. Is that true?
That is absolutely not true. Under no circumstances do federal law enforcement officers have to retreat before using force. I mean, that is insane and absurd that that's even a conversation. I've heard on CNN experts saying that the officer should have just moved out of the way. That in that second, and it's literally a second between her car accelerating towards him and him firing, it's about 1 second. He has to, at that point, draw his firearm and make a decision to use it because she continues moving towards him. And by the way, after he pulls out his firearm, if you watch it really slow frame by frame, he points it. She continues moving towards him as he points. So
Mhm,
he's pointing, she's moving towards him, and then he takes the shot. So
mhm.
there's a forward progress right before he takes the shot. It's continuing straight towards him. And he makes the decision. He commits to using force there. He has absolutely no duty to retreat, which means to evaluate his surroundings and figure out where else he can go to try and avoid getting hit by a car
Mhm.
that is pointed or became pointed directly at him. Remember, he did not position himself there. She positioned her car to point at him. She chose this.
A lot of progressive Democrats are also saying that she's a quote legal observer. I have never heard this term before, but as some law group keeps saying she's just a legal observer, and that's what they're saying. These anti-ICE protesters are their legal observers, like kind of like a journalist. Do you know what this is?
So there are various groups of people who call themselves observers, or First Amendment auditors was the term I've heard before as well. And they follow law enforcement officers around and they try to record them, hoping that they catch them doing something unlawful. So that is a thing that exists. Whether she was doing that or not, I don't know. But I do know from the evidence that we saw is that she was interfering with their work that day, right? She was
Mm,
blocking police vehicles. She's not the one who should be directing where these federal vehicles are moving. She shouldn't be
right.
at traffic, positioning her car unlawfully in the street. She is a very active participant, not an observer. So an observer just watches and records. And there were plenty of people who were observing and recording, even the talking, screaming things. None of those people were directly interfering with law enforcement actions. She was doing something different, which is why they, by the way, did not get shot. It's because they weren't doing anything and they weren't interfering. She ends up getting stopped by police because of her actions, drags one officer on her vehicle as she's moving. Don't forget that second officer is attached. We'll talk about protection of third party in a second, because there's two officers who were assaulted here. And then positions her vehicle and drives with forward progress, accelerating towards the officer who later used force. That's what she was doing. So that's not observation at all.
Mhm.
That's participation to a degree that caused for her to lose her life. And it is unfortunate that life is lost. However, she made choices that escalated to that point. And
Right.
it's important to learn from that, right? For observers or whoever else, if you want to observe, fine. Stay on the side of the road, observe. Don't participate. Don't
Right,
flag.
and the eyewitness said, quote, "She was very successfully blocking traffic. She was successful in trying to do in what she was trying to do." That's what her participant in the protest said, and it was corroborated by someone else who was a witness there. I think someone who owned their home there. And your car would not be perpendicular unless you were making a K-turn or backing up into a parking spot. She was doing neither which, or I guess if your car skid out, but her car wasn't skidding out, it was purposely there. And as you said with the video, there's a conversation happening between the officer and the wife. So they're there for some time. It's not like she reared in, made a crazy turn and she's stuck there. They're there and parked for quite some time. She had actually quite some time to leave the situation. Talk about the third party that you mentioned before.
So you mentioned this new revelation that we learned today, that the officer who fired the defensive shots, that he was about 6 or 7 months ago involved in another assault by vehicle where a car dragged him. I think it was 100 feet he was dragged, and he had serious injuries to his hand and arm. And in this case, one of the officers involved, the one who tried to open the door and put his left hand on the inside of the door, he was attached and holding on to that burgundy SUV as it was reversing and then pulling forward. So he was touching that vehicle and attached to it the entire time. And so when the officer is firing that bullet, and this is obviously going to have to be articulated by him, whether or not he was thinking this, I don't know. But presumably, considering what we know about him, he may also have been thinking he's acting in protection of a third party, which is the second officer. So this is a
Mm,
standard that allows a police officer or anyone really to use self-defense or to use a firearm in order to protect the life or safety of another being. And here it would be the officer attached to the vehicle. So he may have been thinking, oh my God, this officer is going to get dragged just like I did. To protect him, I have to stop this vehicle.
right. That's fascinating. No, and that's absolutely fascinating. What I said was, it's a tragedy that anyone lost their life, especially someone who has got kids. And it's terrible. But what it looks like to me, based upon what the wife said right afterwards, the wife said, "This is my fault. I told her to come down here." The wife is clearly yelling at the officers and participating in some kind of demonstration. This is a woman who looks like she was told that orange man bad. This is, every kind of suit, every kind of thing you've ever heard about ICE being talked about before. And she decided to get involved in a protest. Her wife told her to sit there and do something, allegedly, according to what the wife said. And she made a very bad decision in literally a snap second. If she would have gotten out of her vehicle, like the agent said, she would be alive today. But I have no reason to presume otherwise. You wrote something really profound. I want to conclude on this, but you wrote something very, to me, profound on Twitter, and that I wanted you to talk about? You said, quote, "This is the reality that no one ever discusses, that there is a cost enforcing the law. Society pays this cost through both loss of officers and loss of civilians for various reasons associated with society granting police officers the right to use force to effectuate the will of the legislature. Details aside, something like this was bound to happen, and other instances like this will continue to happen. Lastly, if America wants to continue deportations, instances like this can and will continue to happen. It is a cost that America is willing to pay, question mark. Considering that infrequency of such incidences, I would guess yes." You're saying that, I mean, explain that as a whole. That this is, yes, it's tragic, but it also it didn't it was I wasn't unfazed by how we've deported, I think, 600,000 or 700,000 people, and how this hasn't happened yet. So, do you want to? Is this is? Do you think that this is for everyone who says that ICE agents are these rogue mass people kidnapping people and randomly deporting them? It seems, and they're quote unquote untrained. They seem fairly well trained, given that it's been a year basically since Trump took over, and this is the first time we're seeing this.
American law enforcement officers are incredibly well trained. One of the things that America really needs to pat itself on the back for is the training of our police officers. Up and down, local, state, federal, we have incredible law enforcement officers. And a lot of that has to do with their training. American character is also part of that, right? The personality of the people choosing that employment, but it's also that training. And Americans overall are kept safe because of good training. And so, yes, you're absolutely correct. It is extremely rare for us to see these incidents, even though they should be expected because of that training. The training we provide our officers is incredible. And we only improve it, right? We've got so many officers who are captains, lieutenants. These are people who work on training these officers and they're constantly trying to improve training, learning from each incident. What could we have done differently? What could we have done better? Including this one. I'm sure officers are going to be looking at this up and down and thinking, okay, how could we have avoided this? What could we have done differently? Because officers want to save lives of the civilians who they're arresting. In fact, there are images of officers rendering aid to this woman because that's what our officers do. As soon as an offender is shot by an officer, they render aid, medical aid right away. That's what's happening here. But yes, there is a cost to enforcing the law in society. And that cost is through use of force, right? Because the concept of law enforcement is that in order to effectuate the laws written by our legislators, the police officers have to be able to use force. That's their tool in effectuating those laws. And the initial use of force is the voice, a vocal command. And then it escalates from that to hands, to tools, to firearms, right? There is
Right.
an escalating level. And our officers will eventually, in various incidents, for various reasons, in this case, it was caused by the desire of a woman to not want to comply. But in various incidents, there'll be reasons to use force that could result in death. And this is a cost that society pays when enforcing the law written by legislators. And here, that's exactly what they were doing. Congress said it is unlawful to come to this country unlawfully. They created parameters and created criminal offenses for these ICE officers to enforce. And that's what they were there doing. And they were at work doing that. And this woman interfered with their performance. And one thing led to another. And now she's deceased. And we're here discussing it.
No, okay. I have one more question actually. Since there was a neighbor who said, "I'm a medic. Can I go check on her?" And they were not allowed to. Why was that appropriate?
It's a crime scene. You do not, under any circumstances, there is no law enforcement officer who's going to allow civilians to come in and to do anything unless there's an emergency. If there they had
Mhm.
bunch of officers who were capable and trained of rendering aid, some civilians saying, "Oh, hey, I'm a nurse, I'm a doctor, I can
Yeah.
assist." That's, unless it's an emergency, they're not going to let that person enter a crime scene. But at that point, it's a crime scene.
Right.
And they need to very carefully preserve all the evidence. They also need to make sure that this is not a person who's a threat, because those officers were surrounded by people who posed a threat to them. And so
Mhm.
I think for mainly for the reason that it's a crime scene, but also because they don't know who this person is and they have been threatened by so many individuals in that group. I mean, there's other videos from that day of people just surrounding, abducting under the law. It meets a legal definition of abduction. These officers surrounding and preventing their movement for hours. And so this idea of, well, we should allow these same people to come in and interfere with this crime scene, or as they're claiming to render medical aid. No, I don't think that any supervisor on scene or officer would permit that.
Well, you're so, so smart. Where can people go to read more of your stuff? What's your Twitter handle? Give everyone your social media.
Well, my social media is at Marina Medvin. I only use Twitter and I use that in between work. Otherwise, I work. But Twitter is my point of distraction and entertainment. And so I will randomly discuss my viewpoints on legal issues or political issues in between work to keep myself.
Yeah. Well, you're so smart. Thank you for doing this podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now it's time for the Ask Me Anything segment. If you want to be part of my Ask Me Anything segment, email me Ryan at numbersgamepodcast.com. That's Ryan at numbers, plural numbers, gamepodcast.com. I love these questions. They're so fascinating. To my last listener last week who mentioned a book about New York City in the late 80s and early 90s, I actually bought the book. I can't wait to read it. So thank you for that recommendation. I will tell you guys on the show how I like it. This question comes from Lee. He says, I have been a listener since day one. Lee, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I can't tell you that that means so much to me. And you're a big fan since my first appearance on Ann Coulter Substack. My question is this. Is there any data on how Venezuelans voted in New York City in the mayoral election? And broadly, is there any data on voting patterns and immigrants from communist and former communist countries versus other immigrant groups? Fletcher, thanks for the question. Fascinating question. So, New York City does not have a tremendously large Venezuelan population. The area with the largest concentration of Venezuelans is a neighborhood called Jackson Heights, Queens. It also happens to also the largest concentrations of Southeast Asians. So Mandani won there by a pretty large margin, but because they live all integrated, it's very difficult to sit there and tell. New York's Latino communities are basically primarily Puerto Rican, Dominican, and there's small pockets of Mexicans and other ones, but it's really Puerto Ricans and Dominicans make up the large chunk. How other former communist countries, that answer I can actually give you. So there's a couple of different groups that you could sit there and look at. First, Russians in South Brooklyn voted overwhelmingly in opposition to Mandani. It was not even close. Then you have communities like the Chinese communities over in Flushing, Queens, over in Southern Brooklyn, in the Chinatown areas. They also voted against Mandani. Other Asians, which are often counted when they cluster in Asians together, are Southeast Asians like Indians, Pakistanis. They voted for Mandani by big numbers. But the East Asian communities in South Brooklyn and in Queens, they pretty much voted pretty heavily for Cuomo in that election. And then lastly, another group that I could possibly think of is the Polish community. So Polish community is very interesting because there's two major pockets I can think of. There's part in Brooklyn, in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, but Greenpoint has become hipsterdom. Like it was when I was growing up, everyone in Greenpoint was Polish. Everyone was 100% Polish. It was Little Poland. The churches were in Polish. That has changed substantially because Greenpoint is right next to Williamsburg. As Williamsburg became more expensive, they moved to Greenpoint. A lot of the hipsters and the Polish who lived in Greenpoint, a lot of them have migrated to parts of Queens like Maspeth, Queens. They have something called Pollock Alley in Maspeth, Queens. A lot of older Polish live there who have been through communism. And Cuomo also won that part of Maspeth as well. A lot of in the Venezuelan community, in the Polish community, and in the Russian community, there are a lot of non-registered non-citizens who live in the city. So who knows how many, and also in the Chinese community as well. So who knows how many of them are even capable of vote, and if they represent blocks within those areas. Venezuelans definitely don't. But if you look at certainly how Russians voted in South Brooklyn overwhelmingly against Mandani, East Asians in South Brooklyn and in parts of Flushing, Queens, overwhelmingly for Cuomo. And if you look at the Polish populations in places like Maspeth, where they still have a very large block in certain pockets of the neighborhood, they voted for Cuomo as well. So that's the best I could sit there and give to you. It does seem like they tend to vote less in favor of socialism than other people did, people from former communist nations, especially the Russians. I mean, the Russians, it was like a 90-10 type of voting block for sure. That's the best I could do for you. It's I would love if they actually broke this data down precinct by precinct, but the New York that I grew up in was very segregated, for lack of better terms. Like the Irish did live predominantly in one area and the Chinese in another and the Polish in another. And as you know, in the last 20 years, as New York City has changed, there's a lot more integration, which is both a good thing and bad thing in the terms of trying to identify how certain groups vote. Staten Island's probably the last holdout. I guess Southern Russians and Southern Brooklyn would probably be another holdout, Hasidic Jews. There's a few, there's Irish in the Bronx and in Rockaway, Queens. There's a handful and there's a few pockets of places, but there's not as many as there once was. When I was growing up, it was overwhelmingly. So that's the best I could do for you. Thank you for this question. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you for listening to this podcast. If you like this podcast, please press like and subscribe on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get to this podcast. And I will see you guys next week. I've got some big guests. It's going to be a great show. So very, very excited about that. Thank you, guys.